Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel, and we're continuing on with our read-through of Brandon Sanderson's The Way of King, and we're up to chapter 10, which is entitled The Stories of Surgeons. And we're getting a flashback in this chapter. We're flashing back 9 years ago. And so 9 years ago, lots happened in those 9 years, and we're going to be able to finally start to piece together some pieces of Kaladin's history. And how has the man that we first met in Bright Lord Amaran's army, paying his own money to bring young soldiers where he could feel like he could protect them, something goes horribly wrong. We find him as a slave being taken to the Shattered Plains and now suffering on the bridge cruise. How did this young man get to this spot? Well, 9 years ago, we find Cal, who is 10 years old at the time, stumbling into his father's surgery room. His father's name is Lirin, and he's about ready to begin operating on a young light-eyed woman, a girl from their hometown that Kaladin knows. Kaladin's late, but when he kind of bursts through the door, noticing that his mother, Hasina, is not helping his father, makes him feel like this surgery is maybe not as bad as it could have been. Because if it was very serious, whatever he's about to see, Hasina and Lirin would have immediately started. Lirin is not terribly concerned, but makes a comment that they're going to talk about his tardiness later. So Kaladin pulls up a stool and sees this girl, again, calls her a young woman, but sees that her hand, Sani is her name, her hand is all mangled. Kaladin pulls a stool up to hop on top of it to get a closer look, and his father, Lirin, snaps at him and scolds him and says, "Wash your hands." Kaladin rolls his eyes, says, "Why do I always have to wash my hands? If these things, these rot spren and death spren that I'm supposed to be washing off of my hands are so terrible, how are they going to be afraid of a little water?" Right? A typical 9-year-old boy. That's exactly what he's going to think, right? Well, what's interesting is that Lirin almost subconsciously responds, it's the wisdom of the heralds as he's continuing to prepare for surgery. And they get into a little back and forth about what the heralds have to do with rot spren and death spren. And Kaladin retorts, "But they're demons, father. I heard it off an Arden who came teaching us last spring." Lirin responds, "That's the radiance. You're mixing them again. The heralds were sent to teach mankind. They led us against the Voidbringers after we were cast from heaven. The radiance were the order of knights that they founded." Now, of course, we know a little bit more realistically who the heralds were. And again, sure, they were warriors and they did fight against the Voidbringers, but we remember from the prelude, they're the ones who decided that they could not keep going back to damnation every time that there was a new desolation. And that desolation happened because in damnation, they were suffering when they would break, and they couldn't continue to suffer, to hold back the next desolation. When they returned to Roshar, along with them came the Voidbringers. They had another huge war, and at the end of that war, they had to go back, right? So what a horrible experience for these heralds, and we can appreciate why eventually, at the beginning of our story, 4,500 years ago, we can understand why they made the decision to not go back, to let the world deal with the Voidbringers on their own. However, without telling the one herald, Ta'aln, they let him go back and left him there. Well, we return here, and Kaladin's thinking about what his father said and essentially says, the Radiants, who were the order of knights that they founded, the heralds, Kaladin responds, so they were the demons. And Lirin says, no, they're just the ones who betrayed us. Once the heralds left, they were not demons. They were just men who had too much power and not enough sense. But either way, wash your hands. It's kind of interesting to see how the lore of history has just changed a little bit and really come into even everyday lingo. The wisdom of the heralds tells us that we need to wash our hands. Well, Kaladin goes and washes his hands, comes back, and their attention returns to Saini. And Kaladin's going to notice her broken fingers, her mangled skin. Specifically, though, her third finger is going to be shattered beyond repair. And even at 9 years old, Kaladin is going to ask his father for confirmation. We're going to have to remove that third finger, right, father? And Lirin nods in approval, impressed that his son noticed the actual destruction of the finger, how bad it was, how serious the injury was. Well, once the procedure had ended, Lirin very skillfully removed the finger, sewed everything up, cauterized, set the other fingers. He thinks to himself at how the family of Saini are still going to be angry because even though Lirin performed really an amazing job by saving the entire hand, they're still going to be angry that she lost a finger. And Lirin makes the comment that people had grown so accustomed to medical treatment that they have unrealistic expectations. Well, Lirin finishes the procedure, and Cal's job is to clean up the surgery room. Obviously wipe down any blood or anything else, but absolutely get it back to a place of very, 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 very sanitized, right? Like you would in any hospital room. Lirin goes to cleaning up his tools. He washes them and then he oils them so they don't rust. And that was Cal's least favorite part. Why do we always have to clean? It feels like all we do is clean in here. And as they do, they get into a conversation. Lirin returns. Now, why were you late, Kaladin? And he lets him know, I was playing with my friends. Jam is one of the friends. Lirin scolds him. He says, Jam's 2 years older than you, Kaladin. He probably doesn't want to be putting up with you. He says, well, it was me and Tien were playing with him. And his father has just been called up to Bright Lord Amaran's army. And he's amazed at that. He said, Bright Lord Amaran, the famous light-eyed general. Well, Lirin is not impressed. And we're going to find this throughout the story. Lirin has little use for soldiers. He views it as just people who revel in taking life. He's going to tell Kaladin, there's only two people in this world, those that take lives and those that save lives. And Cal, I've raised you to be one who saves lives. Well, Kaladin gets sort of into an argument. He says, but what about honor? What about defending those that you love? And Lirin points out sort of the most recent major battles that their area has experienced and lets him know, like, none of those were anything other than just Bright Lords trying to expand their power. None of it was essential. Kaladin disagrees in his 9-year-old mind and essentially conclude with his father letting him know, you know what, Cal, I don't want you to be a soldier. Please get that out of your mind. And rather, I've actually been saving up money and I'm going to send you to Cabronth, where you can be trained under real surgeons. Kaladin's eyes go wide. Cabronth? I've heard amazing things about Cabronth and their hospitals and their doctors. Now flash forward a little bit. Cabronth is where Shallan goes to meet with Yasna, right? And the king there, Taravangian. So that's Cabronth. And back now in our story. And I wanted to read for you just kind of the last thing that Lirin says. He says, you have a gift from the heralds themselves. Resting a hand on Cal's shoulder, you could be 10 times the surgeon I am. Don't dream the small dreams of other men. Don't waste your gift on killing. And that's how the chapter ends. We read, Cal hesitated, but soon found himself nodding. And so Lirin here, his father, he's going to return in our story, but a doctor, a surgeon, very intense about saving lives. And that's going to help to shape the man that Kaladin's going to turn into. there's some major takeaways from this chapter. Again, these flashbacks are super important. One of you commented that you're excited when we get to some of the interludes, and these are going to be seemingly disconnected stories in between the major sections of the book. We'll get there because there's a lot that's dropped in those as well. But we get a glimpse here of Cal's medical training. Again, when we first meet Kaladin, he is taking care and dressing the wounds of his soldiers after these battles. Well, we see now this is where he got this training. We get a glimpse into the lore of the heralds and the radiance and how it had grown and changed throughout the millennia. And finally, we find that Tien and Kaladin are brothers. So when we're thinking through why Kaladin is so intense on protecting younger people in the army. And actually, one of the men in the original Amaram army tells the young boy that Kaladin had brought into his troop, he thinks that you all remind Kaladin of someone. We're kind of getting a glimpse and hint here that it's Tien, his younger brother. So what's going to happen to Tien? What's going to happen to Kaladin? We'll continue to find out. But that is chapter 10, the stories of surgeons. A little bit more about Kaladin's backstory. So thanks so much for watching along. We'll continue on reading through. It's funny, I was looking at the page number, and we're getting close to 200 pages into this book, and it still feels like we're just in the introductory chapters. Brandon Sanderson is such a prolific writer, but even through these introductory things, there is a huge world that he's building, and he's putting the pieces in place now, building this foundation. And so even if at times you're reading it and you feel like it's slow, the pace, like there's so much backstory, where's the action? Don't worry, we're getting there. Enjoy these introductory chapters, get to know these characters, because we're going to be with them for a while. Thanks so much for watching. We'll catch you on the next video.